Now that we've done a number of these talks, I think I could explain what this is all about. When I started these talks, and I hope you will like this enough to tell your friends about it, so we can grow the event. I thought it was, just me talking about stuff. That's what I was going to be doing. I was just going to be talking about stuff that my clients or prospective clients would really care about. But over the past couple of years, I have cultivated a roster of personal branding clients who, first of all, are way more interesting than I am, and also, second, have given me the opportunity to play a role in their important work. A climate writer and multimedia producer, a anti-ageist consultant, creator of mentally healthy apps, an advocate for meaningful brands, a C-suite specialist obsessed with peace of mind, an AI ethicist, a trauma psychologist weaving spirit and poetry into living wisdom, and so on. And so these are all people who are on a worthy mission with something new to say. And I'm going to take the stage away from them to talk about selling the truth. They are the truth, and that's what brings us to today's discussion. My guest today is someone who's not only spent a career living in the world of risk, not the abstract in textbooks, but the real human kind of risk. Thomas Fox is well established as the voice of compliance. But that's really just where this talk begins. What's different and even more powerful about today's discussion is the intersection between the professional risks Tom has always evaluated and navigated for decades and the ultimate risk that so many Texans face after the Guadalupe River flood. And it's the kind of moment that really strips everything down to what really matters. Tom's made Kerrville, Texas his home. He co-founded the Hill Country Podcast Network, and now he's writing a book that is intensively researched, deeply personal, raw, and honest. And if you know Tom, you know he doesn't chart out a mission statement. He just walks the path in front of him, one truth at a time. And with all he's accomplished, the best-selling books and awards and community that rose up around him when he lost his mom not long ago as well, Tom arrived at a place where he's going to do what he's called to do. And maybe it's always been like that, Tom, but in this case, he's called to find out what happened and where Kerr County goes from here. So let's get into it. Welcome to a man who understands risk on every level, Thomas Fox. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks very much, Hersh. Pleased and honored to be here with you today.
It's great to have you. We've been talking about this book, but before we even get into the book, I think it's important for our audience to understand risk. Um, Tell us a little bit about the universality of risk.
Well, the universality of risk is that literally from the moment you open your eyes in the morning, put your feet on the floor, and stand up, you're under some potential risk. And so risk is all around us. Some risks we feel like we have captured or mastered. Some risks are so remote we don't think about those risks. Some risks, so I come out of a legal, commercial, professional world, and risks in business are in many ways what allow you to have a very profitable business, because typically the riskier the business is, the higher the reward if you can learn to manage that risk in an efficient manner that's not too costly and is not too time consuming.
Yeah.
From the business perspective, perhaps the thing that's stuck with me forever is I come out of the energy industry, and very early in my career, Someone said to me, Tom, if I don't fly to that oil rig in the Gulf, there's no chance the helicopter's going to crash and I'm going to die. On the other hand, we don't make any money. So, and that really kind of focused it for me that doing things that may seem routine, may not seem routine, all have inherent risk. And if you can't take some risk, you may not be able to make any money. And so, from the business perspective, the largest, at least the last 20 years, my career has been identifying risk, assessing that risk, managing that risk, and then improving your risk management strategy on an ongoing basis through monitoring and upgrading.
Yeah. And we talked about this before where there's life, there's money, there's liberty. You mentioned the risk versus reward. And the dynamicism of it, that risk can change. Um, and you mentioned risk shifting. Um, Maybe explain risk shifting to us.
Risk shifting is typically in the business world. How do you shift the risk off of you or your company directly? So things like insurance, that's actually risk shifting because you're paying an insurance company a premium to compensate you if you have a loss. So that's a risk shifting strategy. If any of our listeners are familiar with the term indemnity, contractual indemnity, which says that if you and I have a contract and my conduct or your conduct hurts you, I will indemnify you. And so you have shifted your risk to me. And so that's a risk shifting strategy. And so those are fairly well known in the commercial world, and we have lots of contractual clauses around that. So in the business world, we're very comfortable with that. Where I think one of the areas I'm exploring in my book is risk shifting in the personal world. And I don't think we really think about that, although certainly we have insurance. We have homeowners insurance. We have personal injury insurance and different types of healthcare insurance. But we don't think about the risk and we don't think about how to shift those risks. And sometimes I don't think we think about what's an appropriate level of risk management strategy for our personal life, Hersh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And it's this kind of synthesis of the professional idea of risk, personal risk, risk in our lives that we're getting into today. For those of you just joining us, by the way, if you have questions, by all means, put questions in the chat, but we will get to those questions during the Q&A session toward the end. Um, I have introduced Tom. I hadn't really given a little bit of an overview of the July 4th, 2025 floods in the Hill Country and Central Texas. But just to kind of reintroduce that concept, more than 135 people, including at least 71 adults and 37 children, have died from the Guadalupe River floods. And Tom is writing a book now about the floods, looking at it from many different angles. One of them, Tom, obviously is the river itself. The river is kind of a character in the real events that unfolded, is how I kind of see it. But maybe share a little bit about that.
Sure. So my county is called Kerr County, and through literally the middle of it flows the Guadalupe River. For about a third of the county, there are two branches to the Guadalupe, North Branch and the South Branch. They come together to form the Guadalupe River just east of a little town called Hunt, Texas. And then it flows another 30 miles to the next county over. It is really the life blood and the life of the county. It's what attracted settlers here because the land along the river was typically either more fertile or they had more game. A lot of cypress trees, which actually led to a huge shingle industry, which led to the founding of the town. It's something we probably don't think about too much anymore.
Yeah.
But cypress trees formed, they were great for shingles. And so, and then later on, certainly in the 20th century, the river became a recreational place. And wealthy people from San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, Austin put homes on the river. starting in the 20s, there was a very large camping community built in West Kerr County. And for those of a certain generation, they'll call it a sleepaway camp. I just call it a camp, but it's an overnight sleepaway for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, and you stay in a camp. And these are typically uh, non-co-ed, so boys camps and girls camps. I'm not sure there's any non or co-educational camps anymore, and they are younger folks, sort of six up to 18 or maybe 16 are in these camps. So they're youth camps. They're all segregated by sex, and literally we've had those for 100 years, and so they're well established in our county. And then the raw beauty of the river was just indescribable. And I went to one of those summer camps, and it's what brought me back here 5 years ago, just the beauty of that part. So the county's been dominated by the river, first as an agricultural resource and then as a recreational resource. I think it was 2 days ago or maybe 3 days ago, I had to go into town early and look at over the river on the bridge, and it was perfect. It was glass topped. It was reflecting the trees that are still standing, light reflected off. It's just as beautiful an expression of nature as you could ever ask for. And that expression of nature, as you pointed out, killed nearly 140 people in 3 or 4 hours
Yeah.
on the morning of July 4th.
Yeah, and the loss of life there is a kind of a multi-generational tragedy because you had the children, you had the people who worked at the camp. There were older people that were lost in this. Um, Tell us a little bit, because I know this is a real important part of your book, about some of the people who were lost in this tragedy.
One summer camp, Camp Mystic, lost 27 campers, 25 campers, and two counselors. They also lost the camp executive director. He died trying to save some girls. Another camp, um, Camp Heart of the Hills, lost its owner and executive director, although they were actually between sessions. Their session was scheduled to start on Monday, July 6th. And if it had been any time later, there would have been horrific loss of life there as well. But that was just a part of it. There were people, long time property owners who'd lived along the river who were perished. There were many people who had recreational homes, and I mean generations of homes along the river. One family, 8 people were washed away literally in their house. And then as we move through the county, there were catastrophic losses at 2 RV parks where 100% of the RVs were swept into the river. And there you had the tragedy of, as you mentioned, multi generations, grandparents, parents, children, uh, just horrific scenes. One family of 8 lost 7. I'm telling the story of one of the stories is at one of those parks. They cried out to someone to throw us the baby because there was a baby in an RV. And people trying to wade out of the river, and the last thing they saw was their children's heads going under. So it was just catastrophic in many ways, beyond belief. On the other hand, um, very believable that something like this could happen. And from basically 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. on the anniversary of our country's birth, July 4th.
Yeah. And that's a real important point. I mean, obviously the human toll and the closer we are to something, the more we feel it, which makes sense. We're human beings. We hear about natural disasters, other tragedies, um, and it's through the prism of what we relate to. So if we're parents, it's very likely we relate to the loss of the children in the camp because wherever we live, our kids may be going to a summer camp, may be out in nature, something like that. Um, if we have parents who are getting older and, but still living on their own, we may think about the RV park. All those things are resonant for us as human beings. And obviously, that loss of life piece is the one that struck us the most. But life is also about, how we live it. And so the element of, what is the impact on this community, not just the grief, but what is the impact on how this community will go forward? First of all, rebuilding after loss of property, but in the wider picture, how does it affect this camping community? And that's part of, again, what you're exploring. The book is dynamic because, and first of all, you haven't completed it yet. How far through the book are you?
I'm about 40% through.
Yeah, about 40% through. Um, and so there's a lot more that you're doing. But as far as the camping community, the community at large, the economic welfare of the community, where does that stand right now?
So there are really four large economic communities that this impacted. You mentioned the camping community in West Kirk County. There are three towns along the river. Uh, one town of about 1,600, one town of about 2,500, and one town of about 20,000. So it's a rural county with rural communities, and each one of those towns and the camping community had huge economic impacts. It's estimated that the economic loss for the county is $20 billion. Now that's people in the camping community, all those who work in that community. The tourism part of this county is people coming to see its raw beauty, people bringing their children to these camps. And in the summer, is like many summer towns, it's very much an increase in population, and that feeds a lot of economic development. There's one other thing I'd like to mention, Hersh, is
Yeah.
you mentioned if you're a parent, this is obviously going to impact you. But the camping part of it, I was talking to a friend earlier this week, and he said the reason it impacted he and his wife so deeply was there's a tradition among Jewish people in America to send their children to what they called sleepaway camp, Jewish sleepaway camp. And I have to admit, I really wasn't aware of that. But he said all of their children did, all of their friends' children's did. And so, sort of every Jewish parent thought about that in the context of, I'm sending my child to a place I trust to deliver them back to me. And I'd certainly recognized that impact in the state of Texas, but I hadn't recognized the broader impact of that when you have a tradition in one faith that you would send your children to a place you think is safe, and to the extent you can determine whether it's safe, you've done so as a parent. And it's just almost indescribable to think about the pain of a parent, but even the pain of a parent, what are you going to do next year? Are you going to have the courage to send your child back next year? I think most people are going to say yes, but are going to think about risk in a very different way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that point because I certainly grew up with the idea of sleepaway camp. That's when you first said the word sleepaway camp. That's exactly what came to my mind. I didn't go to sleepaway camp, which was like a kind of a thorn in my side. It was simply because I grew up in Miami Beach and there was a very vibrant summer camp in town. And so it was like, to send me away didn't necessarily make sense. But I had a lot of friends who went to sleepaway camps. We're now considering sending our daughter to sleepaway camp next year, to a Jewish sleepaway camp. And I mean, it is exactly that. You're trusting somebody with the welfare of your child, and most likely for 4 weeks to 8 weeks, and that's a really big deal. My sons went when they were younger, in the East Coast, and it is a very strong association. So there's definitely a wider group of people that are and people that will eventually see this talk, that will resonate with that. And that brings us also to mental health, to another one of the costs or factors, mental health, that we can probably expand on.
Sure. And so it's a big county, but it's a small community. Everyone lost people. I lost friends. I lost people I did business with. Um, I had to have my last dental or medical appointment. The med tech woman was telling me about losing her nephew. So everyone's been directly impacted. And so the mental health issues, I think, are things we've certainly, many of us have faced those personally with the loss of a parent or other loved one that was a family member. But this was a different level of tragedy. And it was a different level of tragedy for children. Uh, in almost every city in Texas, or at least all the big cities, Houston, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, there were girls who went to that camp. And
Yeah.
many elementary schools lost girls outside of Kerrville. I have a friend in Austin, and they lost two on one street. And there were children who lived in Kerrville who were died. And so everyone in the Kerrville schools, the Ingram schools, the Hunt schools, they know people who died. So the mental health issues for children are just as much. The Kerrville Independent School District lost its soccer coach. And so everyone knew the soccer coach. And so we've got all of that to deal with. So it's a level of mental health that's it's literally up and down the age spectrum, up and down the economic spectrum, up and down the racial spectrum, whatever spectrum you want to put it on. There are people grieving in ways that we, perhaps have not grieved before or had not thought about, or it certainly weren't mentally, healthily prepared for grieving for such a way, whether it's our community, whether it's our friends, whether it's our family, whether it's just others who have had to go through these tragedies.
And when we talk about preparing, we talk about risk, we talk about risk versus reward, living on the in the beauty of the river, in the shadow of the river, now fearing the wrath of the river. But there's a lot of science around this, and Tom is working on his book with a lot of the scientific element. In fact, I think it's the first piece that you did. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the first piece of research and writing that you did. But let's talk about Mother Nature and science around this event, because I think that in the reporting on it, so far, initially in the aftermath, I don't think people got a very clear picture, and there might not have been one. But what has the science research revealed for you?
So I've looked at it from the meteorology aspect. I've looked at it from the hydrology aspect. I've looked at it from the geological aspect of it. And this county is nicknamed Flash Flood Alley for a reason. And that's nickname has been around for a long time. We've had flash floods for 150 years in this county since they've been counting. And the reason is we are on the edge of something called the Edwards Plateau, which is just that, but it's an escarpment. And that means being at the edge, it drops precipitously. So just east of town, we have a 1,000 to 1,500 foot drop. Well, that means that's where the water flows down. And as you get further west in the county, it's higher up, 2,500 to 3,000 feet. Now, that may not sound like much, but in Texas, that's a big deal. And
Right.
so that's point one. And so it's essentially just one big river valley. But this is not the Mississippi River Valley, which is very flat, very low, very flowing, very fertile geography. This is a river valley that's cut out of these hills with limestone bases. And that means the floor of each of the river is limestone. The significance of that is limestone is not porous like the Mississippi River basin, which is dirt and soil and very rich soil. And so when you have a huge rain in the Mississippi itself takes that water in and puts it in the soil. Now, we've had major floods on the Mississippi, but here we don't have major floods from 6 inches of rain on the Mississippi. Here we had 6 inches of rain going downhill onto limestone, which is not going to soak up any of it, on a precipitous drop of 1,000 to 1,500 feet. And it's going to go one direction and one direction only. It's going to go very, very fast. And that's what happened. And now the meteorology is, I don't want to get kind of baked up around climate change or any of that, because once again, we've had these storms before. And what happened was, we are close to the Gulf of Mexico, so you're going to get a fair amount of moisture from the Gulf, not unusual. And because of this geographical anomaly that we get cold fronts from the north, and they hit that warm, moist air from the Gulf, so we get storms. Happens 2 or 3 times a year. Well, what happened this time was there was a typhoon that hit in the Pacific, and it hit Baja, Mexico. And it came across northern Mexico to exactly this point in the hill country, where it met a front from the north, and it met the unlimited fire hydrant of humidity from the Gulf of Mexico, and it caused a 9-mile thunderhead, literally right above West Kerr County. And so it had nowhere to go but down, and that's what it did. And in literally 6 hours, we had 6 inches of rain. And then the rain hit that limestone, and it started going down. And it's not just the water coming down that river, because this is a river in a valley. So the hills on each side are draining into that river. So we've got smaller creeks draining in, but every inch of that water is going downhill. And so there were floods here, killer floods here in 35, 57, 68, 87, 96, and 02. And so this is not unusual. It's not unknown. And so we're going to have a flood, and every 20 years is going to be a bad flood. And this happened to be the worst. So you had a 40-foot wall of water coming down at 20 miles an hour, and just wiping out everything literally in its path.
Yeah. And there's a book you can read called Flash Floods in Texas, because that's, the more that I've learned about it, a lot from you, Tom, this is a risk, let's say, that has factored in to the lives of people in Kerr County for a long time. And now it's that, like we talked about in the beginning of the talk, that dynamic element of risk that can be in business or it can be in life, where the risk has shifted in scope and the risk has shifted in intensity, based on all the things that you have learned so far in researching the book from so many angles. Um, I'm actually interested in some of the other angles. There are other angles in the book that you haven't written or fleshed them out yet. What are some of the other pieces of this puzzle that are going to be explored in your book?
Sure. So at 1:14 a.m., there was an alert from the National Weather Service that flash floods were occurring and potentially life-threatening. And then that was it for 3 hours. Well, there were people at the National Weather Service who were tasked with taking that information and then putting it out through a relay system called Code Red. And Code Red is the thing you get on your phone when, there's a flood or a tornado or whatever the weather event may be. Well, those people got doged out of existence. So there was no one there at FEMA or the National Weather Service to do that. Now, that was sort of point one. But the bigger point about notice and alerts were there was no alert system in Kerr County. And there was no way to get the information of, we are having a 6-inch rainfall, and the rain gauges on the river washed out. When the river got so high, there was no way to get that information to the people in West Kerr County or those towns I mentioned. And so there was no alert system. It wasn't the alert system failed. There was none. And that is a significant part of this story. And that was just a series of cock-ups for literally 20 years. Kerr County tried to get an alert. There was an alert system in the 80s after the 87 flood, which killed 11 people. That lasted about 10 years. It became inoperable because it wasn't kept up. After there was a major flood in 2015, not in Kerr County, and at that point, the county commissioners tried to get a alert system in place. The cost was prohibitive, and the state refused to help fund it, and so they couldn't get funding to do it. And that was in sort of 2017, 2018. The county itself in 2024 had identified the lack of a warning system as a critical element in risk in the county, but they hadn't done anything about it. There was one public organization that was looking at that issue in Kerrville called the Upper Guadalupe River Authority, but even with that title, they didn't have authority to put it in. Excuse me. So, for a variety of bureaucratic and governmental reasons, there was no alert system. And so there was no information that got to the camp, for instance, that yes, they knew that there was a flood. That wasn't the question. What they had no appreciation of is this is the worst one you've ever seen coming. And you need to get out now, not tie your canoes down, not think about what we need to do. No, you need to go out right now at 1:14 and start pulling people and evacuating your camp or going to higher ground or something. And if there had been a warning system at 1:14 a.m., whether it's sirens, whatever it may be, and people knew now, get out now, because many people on the river had less than 5 minutes, but from the time somebody banged on their door to their house washed away. And that was the warning system. I had one camp, not the camp in question, tell me, we got a text at 1:15. It's really bad up here. You guys need to take care downriver. And that was the warning system. And but that doesn't tell you have a 40-foot wave coming. So the lack of an alert system, and the technology is available today. And there's technology in place further downriver that reads all of this information. But the county never went back after the last decade of their failures to persuade the state, and the state doesn't think it's important enough didn't, to do anything. So that's a major part of this story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one that people were wondering about at the time. And I can see where it's going to be something that will, resurface as a local and, state and national discussion. Um, once this, well, okay, that brings up two things. One is a question of when do you think the book will come out versus when do you think the findings that are coming out are going to start kind of bubbling up again?
Well, hopefully my book's out by July 4, 2026. That's our goal.
Mhm.
I meet my publishing deadline or my delivery of manuscript, and then the publisher does his part. Uh, the state is going to have a formal investigation starting in the next legislative session, which begins in January 2026. So we won't have any formal state findings till then. There's been no local investigation nor a FEMA-led investigation. In terms of the warning system, the goal of the city of Kerrville and the county of Kerr is to have a warning system in place by the time the camps open in June. Now, the question is, they've already identified the warning system they want to put in place. It's top of the line. The price has dropped dramatically, from 50 million to 15 million. So it's something that is doable. They're trying to get state approval, and they don't know how long that state process is going to take. Hopefully it's enough to have something in place before those camps open, but that's the open question at this point.
So is there a liability question or a legal, like a lawsuit type of question around some of these issues?
So there are, I think 22 21 or 22 of the parents of the deceased girls from Camp Mystic have filed suit. I think there's 4 or 6 different lawsuits around Camp Mystic. There are 3 lawsuits around those RV parks I mentioned. It's a little bit different there because it's not children. But the claim is that the RV parks did little or nothing to alert the people in the RVs, get out now. And I should also note that there were 3 RV parks together. The one that was furthest from the river, the owner lived on site, and somehow she knew, and she's not explained how she knew, these people need to get out. And she just knew from the same alerts everyone else got. And so she went literally at 2 in the morning to individual RVs and pounded on doors and said, get out now. And she got everyone out save one RV that stuck around. So she's really a hero for getting the people evacuated out of her RV park.
Yeah. Now, clearly, as we talked about in the beginning, your background in compliance, your qualifications in a certain sense to approach these issues of risk, issues of the ultimate risk, and issues of the science and the facts behind what happened and what we're looking at for the communities involved going forward. It all makes sense. But why why do you think you were the person at this point in time to write this book?
So this was obviously very personal to me. I moved out here because of the camping community. I know many of the people in that camping community. I've maintained those relationships. Um, and it really surprised me. This hit me harder than 9/11, which I didn't think anything could hit me harder than that. And I think it was just the personal nature of knowing people who died, seeing the devastation. We saw the devastation. We saw the river uh, up to the literally the bridge in Kerrville. We saw the foliage damage. These were was a river lined with 100-year-old 30-foot cypress trees that half of them were downed from this flood, and the devastation to the flora is catastrophic. And so even today, if you drive across the river, you still see 30-foot down cypress trees along the riverbank that haven't been removed yet. And so the damage is just almost beyond belief. And I really struggled with what is my role in all this. And I realized that to get through my own grief, I needed to write this book. And maybe at this point in my life, I've studied enough, I've written enough other books. Um, I live in the community. I know a lot of the people involved of the city government and county government. And I thought, this is what I'm here to do now.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, from the point of view, as I mentioned, as someone who wasn't there, but it resonates on some level. Uh, at this point, I would love to ask Francie, Francie, you are in the Philippines. You have been going through typhoons and, um, we almost get used to this idea of natural disasters. We also almost get used to this idea of the typhoons hitting you. But can you share? Would you be willing to share a little bit, Francie, about what exactly is going on there with your experiences and the weather?
Yeah, so this time of the year, it's really storm season, and especially here in my location, this where I live, we usually get flooded. Like, the flood here, because we're near the river, the flood here goes up really, really high, like first floor. I've seen houses because my house is like higher on regular houses here. So I've seen houses really under flood water, like the first floor is really underwater, and we don't have any warning system as well here. So, um, yeah, it's just devastating seeing like the last storm that hit us just a few weeks ago. It's really sad because there's a lot of damage, I know few people died because of the flood.
Yeah. Um, and that because that's one of the things that there's no warning system, uh, there, and yet these are very common occurrences. But I think, as Tom pointed out, it's like the occurrence is not a crazy unknown. It's the intensity and the severity of it. Do you guys in the Philippines have any sense of how bad, let's say, these typhoons can get? Um, you know, what is your perspective there on that?
Well, we have news like about weather. Um, but I think people just get used to typhoons, like
Yeah.
category 5 typhoons, category 4. Most of the people won't don't want to leave their houses, even if they know that it's going to be really destructive. So yeah.
Yeah. Did you have any question for Tom that he can answer, having listened to the discussion about his book?
Um, no, I don't have questions right now. I think it was a really good discussion. I didn't know that it's happening as well in the US. So yeah, it's the same here. The same here.
Yeah. A good way to maybe kind of bring this to like full circle, Tom, is, you know, what looking ahead, um, are there maybe two takeaways, even at this point in the book, that we would say uh, are things we really need to focus on, both in terms of figuring out, the relativity of risk versus reward when it comes to where we live, and also to prevent these kinds of tragedies as much as we possibly can, like the extent to which we can possibly prevent them
So,
or
Hersh, I
deal with them.
guess maybe one is when the risk is potentially loss of life. I think you have to be um, more sensitive to that, and you have to take more stronger actions than you might take if this was a business context where you might lose money or violate something. And so when you have children in your care that you've been entrusted to care for, when you have your parents or grandparents with you or your children with you in an RV park, I think you need to be more risk averse simply because there had never been a 40-foot wave of water in Hunt, Texas. Doesn't mean you're not going to get it. And I know you have some fairly dramatic weather events in your state. And I mean, I can remember I think it was the 90s, but there was talk of a 40-day biblical flood in Iowa.
Yeah.
I lived through Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and that was 1,000-year flood, only flanked by two 500-year floods in the same year. In 2021, we reached 7 degrees in Houston, not for the first time, but for the first time since 1890. And so you can have an extreme weather event. And simply because there had never been a 40-foot flood in Hunt, Texas, does not mean it's never going to happen. You can be in the floodplain, you can be out of the floodplain, but if you get a flood that is beyond your experience, catastrophic events will happen. Uh, 9/11 in large part was a failure of imagination. No one in the government seemed to think they could do that, even though that had been part of an X-Files episode once.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
um, we've heard the word in Kerr County unprecedented. Well, unprecedented simply means it didn't happen before. It does not mean it's not going to happen in the future. And I think that that will be one of the biggest lessons simply because we've had bad floods before and no one's told us this is the worst. We're going to ride it out like we did before. I don't think you can do that anymore. And you certainly can if it's someone beyond you. You may want to take that risk yourself. But If you have people in your charge, and particularly children, I think you have to do everything possible to protect them. And hopefully that's one lesson. The second lesson is there are risk management strategies, and you kind of started with that, and I want to circle back to that. And part of that can be an early warning system. The technology exists today to have an appropriate early warning system. One of the problems or issues in Kerr County is limited cell phone service in the western part of the county because it's so rural and it's so mountainous with hills and valleys. And it really does go away because I've driven all the way up there. And so, well, what else is available? Well, there's Elon Musk's Link. There's other satellite services, and they're warning sirens. I don't. In Houston, we had a warning siren literally for tornadoes, and went off for real maybe two or three times in my life. But they tested it once a week, so everybody knew what it sounded like. And I don't know if you guys have warnings alerts for a tornado, but
Yeah,
everybody
we do.
knows that means whatever get to safety means, where it means, that's what you do. So having a warning system in place, you have to have one of those if your county is called Flash Flood Alley.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, in Iowa, that is a major thing that we're aware of, that we have the apps on our phones, we have the warning systems. We rely on the trackers to tell us where those tornadoes are. And I mean, thank God, it hasn't hit exactly where we are. But when you look at the path of some of these tornadoes and where they touch down, they do real damage. And I can't imagine it without the warning system that is currently in place in this state. One question that came in that I just wanted to add here at the end is what people can do to encourage or demand that there is it local, state, federal, in terms of getting those systems in place.
I think we have to leave the federal government out of this because Trump wants to disband FEMA and
Yeah.
pretty much killed FEMA's efforts around recovery and rebuilding. So the efforts have been local and state. So I think it's going to be both of those to local for putting the precise design in place that's appropriate for your locality, and then the state for funding it because it will be a multi-million dollar expense and will probably require approvals from several different regulatory agencies. So in Texas, that means water, that means weather, that means a agency that regulates camping, the camping industry, all of that. So I think the state is going to be an important place for people to go to.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom, for doing this. I think that, as you know, I think this is a really important topic and a really interesting one. But also, I think this is like probably the first of many talks that are going to take place on the subject. Um, and certainly around your book. I mean, I think you're going to probably, you have plans when the book does come out, hopefully in July, to be speaking to organizations, being available to talk more about this, and you'll have learned more about all of it. And so we're looking forward to that. Thanks to everybody who attended on various platforms and who submitted your questions. And I really appreciate your time and your attention on this, Tom, because ultimately, I think, as you mentioned at the very beginning, the choices we make about our personal safety, about risk, sometimes we can get so bogged down in the uh, the risk and reward of business and not enough of the personal lives we choose to live, where we choose to live, and how we mitigate the risk that we face. I think a lot of us have a desire to maybe put our head in the sand a little bit and look away from tragedies and just hope that it doesn't happen again or it doesn't happen as bad. And I think your work on this goes a long way toward taking our heads out of the sand and looking at a situation and seeing, what can we do better, and what happened, and what can we do now.
Think about the risk of getting in and out of the shower.
Yeah. Yeah, and they exist. They exist everywhere. Well, thank you, Tom. Thanks so much for being here with me.
Thank you.